Welcome to the Fantasy NASCAR podcast. Atlanta kicking off the playoffs, a plate race or a drafting track this weekend. Everyone has a chance. Not as much of a chance like at Daytona or Talladega. BJ McLeod probably doesn't have a chance anywhere, but he has less of a chance at Atlanta because it's not full-blown super speedway, but it definitely tests positive. It is definitely on the spectrum of super speedway racing where at least 30 cars can win. And we witnessed just weeks ago, one of those 30 cars, Harrison Burton, took home the W. Almost a W for Parker Retzlaff. Atlanta isn't as extreme, but if you remember the first race way back, second race of the season, you'll remember Daniel Suarez winning by a split second over Ryan Blaney and Kyle Busch. Suarez has been pretty good at Atlanta. So is his teammate, Ross Chastain, which brings up a point. Is there something different about Atlanta than Talladega and Daytona? And yeah, absolutely, there is. So let's look at that difference. Again, when we look back, it was the second race of the year. It was a back-to-back plate race following Daytona. And as is the case with the super speedways, they don't practice. And we don't really mind at Daytona and Talladega. But this is slightly significant at Atlanta, which is a pretty new track, and a super speedway that handles a little differently. There is much more handling involved than at Daytona and Talladega, where you're pretty much just preparing to run the draft and stay in line. Whereas at Atlanta, you can kind of make some moves or make some bad moves. Because handling is such a factor and they're turning at such great rates, and this car likes to step out, it's very easy to spin and get loose. And not having practice just hurts from the reps perspective, but it is also challenging from the setup perspective. And drivers talked a lot about that before the race and during the race. The setups sort of matter. And you could see teams, because they don't get to practice and dial it in, really not qualify well because they just put too much downforce in it, being very cautious. And then that leads you down the route of, all right, well, if someone just doesn't qualify well and they've added too much downforce and they're not trimmed out, will they A, run better in the race? B, does that also set up place differential opportunities? And Brad Keselowski is the guy that we'll hone in on here. And Keselowski talked a lot about putting a lot into their setup, or a lot of downforce, and believing the car would run better during the race. And while that might have been the case, he still finished 33rd. Because at the end of the day, whether you're trimmed out or you've put more downforce into the car so that it handles better and you didn't qualify as well, but that's okay because you think you'll make up for it when the racing plays out. But does it even matter? Because it's still a super speedway at the end of the day, and Keselowski finishes 33rd. Did he have a better race car? Maybe. Did he have a better game plan? Maybe. But in the end, even if you do add downforce and you have a pretty sporty car on the super speedway, there are other cars on the track that are more trimmed out. There are other cars that are going to spin out and take you out. And we see that at Atlanta in the spring. And I mean, I don't know what your better choice is, trim out or not. I mean, obviously, I think Keselowski was on the right path. You probably want more downforce during this race, but in the end, they're really going to matter. And at the same time, like, why even trim out? Great, you qualified up front at Atlanta. You still have to survive the race. Good luck surviving with a car that may be ill-handling, and once you get in traffic, it's bad news. So what does that really matter for us? What matters for us from the DFS perspective is it's a super speedway. And I think the first way just illustrates, look at how many cautions we get. And the cautions can be big ones, but they can also be smaller ones because the cars get loose on their own. A tiny bump will send a car through the infield. So we get plenty of spins, we get plenty of damage, and a lot of cars are involved in incidents throughout the day, but still are able to bring it home inside the top 10. Just count the cautions. So we got one right there in stage one. We got another one in stage one. We got another one. So you get 3 cautions in stage 1. Super speedway racing, boys. Stage break, we run clean through stage 2. Stage 3 starts getting a little tighter. Wreck early, wreck again at 200, wreck again at 220, wreck again at 241, 250, and then that'll do it. Plenty of cautions, plenty of opportunities for drivers to survive and jump all the way forward. When we look at the average running positions of these drivers, Suarez gets the win, runs around 15th most of the race. Super speedway racing. Blaney's up front the entire time, not a surprise. Cindric also in a Penske ride that has been pretty solid, up front the entire time. They're not huge jumps in place differential, but we do see people gain a bunch of positions through attrition, through super speedway racing. Happens, deal with it. It's not Daytona, it's not Talladega, but you got a guy like Truex here who does the reverse. 3rd place at 255, drops down. Other guys jump up. Not huge gains. You see Hamlin goes down, Gilliland goes down, Barry goes down. Attrition, survival, super speedway racing. You want to look at some past optimal lineups? Sure. And the reason why we're doing that is to really hammer in last that it is a chasing place differential situation, but we aren't seeing people start way back. For example, we got Suarez starting 23rd, Stenhouse 27, 21, 18, and then we're getting these guys starting up front who are leading laps, finishing. We're seeing more of a 4-2 build at Atlanta where 4 are in the back, but not deep in the back. And then you're having to flirt with 2 guys inside the top 10. That was the last optimal lineup. It left $600 on the table. You probably are going to end up spending a lot of salary, as opposed to Daytona and Talladega, where you can get cheap guys way in the back. And they're not completely off the board. They aren't. I mean, look, you got Kaz Grala at 5,200, starts 33rd, finishes 14th. Fine play. 9.8 FPPK, fantasy points per 1,000. A 9.8 X return. Classic plate play. LaJoy had to pay a little bit more for him, but your classic plate play. Starts 32nd, finishes 13th. And then this always goes back to my big theme of, do you want to try to build the optimal, which then means you have to slide in these guys starting in the top 10? Or would you rather just be a little bit safer and build the best lineup? Which means, you could get off Blaney, you could get off Cindric, and you could afford any of the next 3 drivers scoring 7th, 8th, and 9th most fantasy points. All 3 of those drivers fit the criteria of a guy starting in the back. Even Kaz Grala in a Rick Ware car, competitive enough. We've seen what LaJoy can do at super speedways. Ty Gibbs is fine. You even go a little bit deeper. We want to jump over this Kyle Busch landmine of him starting 3rd. Scores the 10th most fantasy points. Way too risky. 100 cheaper. You get Elliott in the back. You get Hocevar cheap in the back. So, while the optimal lineup looks a little interesting, if we just zoom out a little bit more, we'll see that, actually the cut line was pretty deep. The optimal lineup featured drivers inside the 20s. But if you expand that, you build a really good lineup by stacking guys in the back. Let's look at Atlanta in the fall of last year. Summer, technically. Again, you can forward all top 6. Leave a lot of money on the table in this one. And because you're going to get cautions. You get cautions at 156, 161. Plenty of cautions throughout the race. All this data available in the Fantasy NASCAR Spreadsheet, Venmo, PayPal, Cash App. So as we look at the starting position for these guys, 18th, a little bit closer. Sometimes when you're moving your line, you're going to take guys all 20th and back, 25th and back. We'll occasionally see, if you just would have tiptoed over that line a little bit more and expanded to the driver starting 19th or 18th, then that was the case to go in. So yeah, Byron 18, Suarez again showing up 26, Finishing second. Add a little color here. It's always fun when you get to watch me manipulate the spreadsheet. Do some work. You should have done this before the podcast. AJ 19th. Kyle Busch starting 22nd. 20th for McDowell. And that very scary play of JJ Yeley starting 24th. Either way, your average starting position around there is what, 21, 22? 22 probably. Then if you want to expand outward, 6th most fantasy points. 7th was Stenhouse at 29. You jump over the Brad-Keselowski landmine. 11th's probably just too close to the front for us. Has a good day because of laps led. Decent finish. But absolutely has to finish really in the top 3 to work. You jump over that one. You got a 25. 25 Jones. 17 Haley. 23 Elliott. You even have a decent day by BJ, who finishes 20th, runs 28th the entire day. So, while in our heads we think Atlanta is a little less volatile, the wrecks are a little different, handling matters, still super speedway, and from the DFS perspective, you still can just play guys in the back and not necessarily try to build that optimal lineup with guys up front. Look at the spring race at Atlanta. And so you have the pole sitter who leads 35 laps. Scores 84 fantasy points. Yeah, it can happen. This is just like one of the few times a pole sitter has scored optimal at DraftKings. But it's Atlanta. It's its own little beast. Kind of different. So if it were to happen, it would probably happen here. But my takeaway is I'm not really going to worry about it. I will likely never roster the pole sitter at a super speedway. Just not going to take the chance. I'll definitely concede building the optimal lineup and build more probable lineups. Like playing guys, LaJoy starting 31st, 6,000. Ty Gibbs starting 35th for whatever reason, 5,900. Jones 28th. Again, jumping over the Keselowski landmine. Has a top day with his laps led, but too close for me. You know, maybe you would consider Tyler Reddick starting 16th. I probably would be a little hesitant. And so this year would have been a tougher one with 16, Tin Bell, Hamlin starting 14, Busch 17, might be within range. You'd feel comfortable with AJ. You'd feel comfortable with Noah at 22, Ross 18 maybe. Then you got a Stenhouse 27, a Truex 29. I don't think any of those would have been bad plays. You pick drivers that made it to the end of the race. You pick drivers that scored plenty of fantasy points. You're winning money. This wasn't your best day, but I think the overall long-term strategy so far as we go through this Atlanta is still to go heavy on the back. If you went heavy in the back and kind of moved your lineup to include one or two of these drivers, you probably did pretty well. Atlanta fall 2022. Pole sitter again. It hurts. I know I just said I'm not rostering the pole sitter. Just not going to do it. And if I lose out on the number one driver, all right, that's 4 or 5 points. But the risk is just too high. I mean, you look at the end of the day. Yeah, the guy led the most laps. Wins the race in Chase Elliott. He scored 4 more points than Eric Jones, who started 25th, was significantly cheaper. I'm just not trying to build the optimal lineup. Just trying to build a winning lineup. And if I build a bunch of winning lineups as opposed to chasing the optimal and bad things happen, I think the bad things are survivable with winning lineup builds. Whereas if you try to build optimal with Chase Elliott and a bad thing happens, that lineup's pretty much toast. The negative place differential, all that's just going to sink you if you want to at least min cash. And even if someone does have Chase Elliott in their lineup and you don't, you're still right there. You still have 5 more picks to battle. I mean, assume that you both have Chase Elliott, or he has Chase Elliott and you don't, and you move down, and Eric Jones is your first pick. All right, so your first pick versus their first pick. You're trailing by 4. Following along, you built your winning lineup versus their optimal lineup. They got Chase Elliott, you got Eric Jones. All right, you're down 4. You still have 5 more picks to beat that DFS player. You get 5 more picks. And if your 5 picks survive the race and get a top 10, and 4 of his 5 get there, then you're fine. And you didn't have to take the risk of rostering Chase Elliott. It's a safer, better way to go. Now, if you need the optimal line to win 50,000, then so be it. But I like my chances overall staying off the pole. Haley, third most fantasy points, starts 24th. Burton, 27th. Almirola, 22nd. And you got Ross and Cindric again. Good Atlanta cars so far through the career. Starting 2nd and 5th. I just jump over those landmines and avoid them. Because with, 2 fewer points than Cindric, you could get Bubba Wallace. Scores 48.35. And he's starting 32nd. You could also flirt with Cole Custer, starting 18th. Probably going to go in that direction. Rounding up the top 10, you got Blaney, again, starting inside the top 10. I'd avoid that landmine, same as a Suarez landmine, and feel comfortable taking a Keselowski starting 31st, or a Gilly starting 28th, or LaJoy starting 30th. Putting those guys in your lineups, you're going to build winning lineups that make money. And we're just talking about 1, 2. I mean, the difference between Suarez and Keselowski is a 10th of a point. Keselowski was what? 1 or 2.25 points from being a top 10 day in terms of DFS. I'm just going to chase place differential. When we go way back to 2022, we do have a car starting up front, close to the front. So 5 of the drivers in the optimal lineup, or 4, start inside the top 15, which is spooky. But again, there's just a little bit of points that separate these drivers. I mean, if we look from 3rd down, there is a 20-point swing, but you're seeing a lot of drivers in the 40 range. It's not a huge difference. And there's a lot more risk taking these guys that start up front. So yeah, we do have 4 drivers in the optimal lineup starting in the top 15. Half of the top 10 DFS scores are starting in the top 10. But the other half are in the back. LaJoy starts 33rd, scores the 2nd most fantasy points. Truex, 26. Justin Haley, 22nd. Even Josh Bilicki, 8th most fantasy points, starts 36th. Keselowski, 24. Reagan, 25. And then as we skim down the top 5, we've got a 37 in Biffle, a 34 in BJ, 23rd in Eric Jones. So stacking the back is completely alive and well. And I know we want to spin Atlanta as that it's different, and it is true. And there is validity to the claims. It's a different kind of super speedway, and maybe you do want to play drivers that start up towards the front. And it kind of lends itself to excessive podcasting and time filling and creating narratives and stories, and I don't mind that. If you want to gobble up some time, like I'm doing right now, talking about how Atlanta is slightly different, it's worthwhile. It's not a fake podcast. I'm making stuff up just to sell spreadsheets. There is a significant difference. But the more you think about it, and the more you apply strategy to your thoughts on Atlanta, you really don't need to think about it. You can talk yourself in circles. You can make your mind change it plenty of times on Sunday about how Atlanta is different and how you can build the optimal lineup, be different, and start drivers up front. And you really can think yourself and twist yourself in a knot over that. Or you can also just accept that if you're trying to build a winning lineup, nothing's really changed. If you are trying to build the optimal lineup, which I don't think is the best strategy, then yeah, it is right to treat Atlanta differently and to start drivers up towards the front, because it is a unique super speedway. If you accept that you just want to win, and hopefully the winning lineup is good enough to win the GPP, then from the winning lineup strategy, nothing's really changed. you're playing drivers in the back. And as we see, Josh Bilicki, not the fastest car, starting 36th, is still able to score the 8th most fantasy points, like we would see at a Daytona, like we would see at a Talladega. It goes from 36th to 16th. Going into Sunday at Atlanta, is there any driver in the field that you think is incapable of finishing 16th? Even a BJ McLeod, if he is entered into this race? Do you think BJ can't get to 16? He can get there. Can he get much further? Probably not. But as we can see with Bilicki, that was good enough. Anyone can get a top 20. And if that's the case at Atlanta, then for all intents and purposes, this is just another super speedway. It's Daytona, it's Talladega. Sure, it's not the same. Is it a lighter, softer version? Maybe. But at the end of the day, we see a bunch of place differential drivers come through. Do we see some drivers that run better here? I mean, yeah, as we mentioned, Chastain and Suarez seem to have a pretty good setup. But there are still wrecks. Still cars getting turned. Still going to be bad blocks. All those things are going to happen. This is the playoffs. I don't know if people are going to play it more nice and not want to ruin anyone's playoff experience. But as we've seen recently, most of these drivers will do anything to win anymore. They want that win. And they don't care what they're going to do to somebody else. They don't really see deferential, courteous treatment, really, going around in NASCAR in any of the series. I don't know why people would be so polite this weekend and not go for wins. Parker Retzlaff going for a win. Austin Dillon going for a win. Has anything really changed? If anything, you have more of a chance to get that win. Yeah, it's the playoffs. You don't want to ruin someone's playoff. But then in the back of your head said, well, I matter first. It matters more for me and my team. That's the reality. Look, if it's an intermediate track and you're a lap down, yeah, you get out of the way. It's pretty easy. You don't have a chance at a short track or whatever. You can be courteous and deferential that time. This is the one week where you say, nah, it's about me. I've actually got a chance. I want this win. So I don't think anyone will be nice. I don't think anyone's necessarily going to do anyone favors. Maybe get some pushes at the end via team orders. But as far as racing cautiously, I don't think that's going to happen. And you can even just tell yourself, hey, it's first race of the playoffs anyway. So if you're going to make a mistake or something bad happens, it's the first race. No one can dig out of that hole. And no one's going to mind. It's a super speedway. You can be courteous at Kansas. You can be courteous down south in the friendly state of Tennessee at Bristol. Although Bristol is never really that courteous of a track. Yeah, it sometimes tends to be the night race in the playoffs, though, at least for some of the lesser drivers. So, wrapping it all up, super speedway, stack in the back, build a winning lineup. 2010 you're in. Is that what my old phrase was? You know, about 20 place differential points in the top 10. That seems a little excessive for this race. Daytona, Talladega, it's usually 2010 you're in. You want to aim for about 20 place differential points in the top 10. I don't think you have to be that aggressive. Probably more like 15-10 you're in. 10-10 you're in. You're going to need a significant amount of place differential points, as you can see, for your winning lineup. I would say probably 15 to 20. And you may only need a top 15 from your drivers, but I would aim for a top 10. Make it hard to roster Bilicki and the BJ McLeods. If you set the bar at top 10, you say 15, then they much more are in play. And I think you can move that line based on starting position. When you got a guy starting 36, you say, all right, well, he doesn't necessarily need, 2010. Well, he's getting the 20 place differential with a 16. You take that. If I get a 20 place differential from a driver, then I like it. But yeah, those are your strategies. Stack in the back. Build the winning lineup, not the optimal lineup. 2010 you're in. We'll just stick with that phrase. You know what I'm talking about, though. Thanks for joining me. Like, subscribe, share. Get this thing out there to the people. You want to get your hands on the Fantasy NASCAR Spreadsheet, raceforprize.com, or just click on the links below. You can Venmo, you can PayPal, Cash App, $30 for September. And you'll get all the Atlanta sheets, the Watkins Glen sheets, the Bristol sheets, and the Kansas sheets. Thanks for joining me.